choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Hello, Annie, how are you?
Hello, I'm well. I still can't see you though.
You still can't see me? Are you missing
Oh
out?
my god, I can see you. Oh my god, you disappeared again, but I can see you.
So how is your cosmic isolation this week?
I've been wearing some of my most ridiculous space outfits on the basis that it makes me happy. And then I've been wearing them. So we have a little cafe down the road that is still open. And
Right.
I've been going to get coffees and lunches and stuff, takeaway. And so I've been going out wearing like full space gear, head to toe, like I'm talking platform sparkly boots and
So
like
you have to feel good, you have to look sharp, you have to not let this world event get us down. We are here, we have arrived, and we are still going to be as fabulous as we've always been.
And I'd like to congratulate you, Dylan, on being the first guest on this podcast on this video version of the podcast to make me feel underdressed. I mean, I'm wearing space overalls and I'm wearing penguin socks that you can't see. And I feel like I didn't get the memo.
Yes, well, we all have to look good. Embodied cognition and all of that. Even though I'm locked at my desk with no human contact, slowly going insane, I still look the part. So that makes me feel better.
You look fabulous. Let's do a quick intro. Welcome to the video edition of Space Junk Pod, Dylan. Would you like to explain for those who have not listened to your podcast who you are, what it is you do, and why you are wearing such a beautiful suit?
So my name is Dylan O'Donnell. Ultimately, I'm just a dude in the backyard with way too much time and a big telescope and observatory, which I call the Byron Bay Observatory. It's not a podcast I run, it's a YouTube channel. I do have an Instagram account where you can see all of my images of space. Essentially, as far as STEM goes, I'm more of the STEAM on the art, because I'm making the pretty pictures. And in many ways, that's how a lot of people sort of get turned on by the whole space thing, is with the imagery and that sort of unlocks the imagination about what's out there and how it all works. And that's certainly the rabbit hole I went down. I recently graduated from Swinburne with a degree in astronomy, so that's my first science degree. And that started because I just walked into a shop and bought a telescope and led me down that rabbit hole. Unfortunately, my graduation was cancelled because of the pandemic, so that's why I just have to sit here in a suit to pretend that I'm smart.
No, that's really sad. I'm so sorry to hear that. Is there any plan to do an online graduation where you can wear an uncomfortable robe and sort of forget which side the tassel is meant to go? Actually, I have one. Say that.
Oh, really? We can reenact my forgotten graduation ceremony.
I just disconnected.
This is going so well.
This is like this episode is going to be a comedy of errors. Here we go.
Oh, look at that. That's just fantastic.
So here you go. Like I can post it to you, and you can do the thing of being like, which side does the tassel go, and
embodied cognition. And just so the dear viewers at home know, Annie and I have a little bit of history. We both I believe we went to a wedding together, and Annie ghosted me. She didn't even say hello.
What?
You were at my brother's wedding, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and I didn't know who you were, and you didn't know who I was, and like years later, I think my brother mentions, "Oh, you know what? I know this girl. She's kind of spacey like you are. You guys should probably have a chat."
It's very true, and this is what happens. You turn up to things like weddings, and you don't realize that someone else there is cool and nerdy, because you don't necessarily turn up wearing your space overalls. And that's what I
Exactly.
should have done in retrospect.
Yeah.
But
You don't have a sign on it head saying space dog.
exactly. But it all turned out really well. So when I was last up in the Byron area, Dylan and I recorded a podcast on astrophotography, which you can find on the Space Junk podcast feed if you're interested. And even if you're not interested, go find it anyway. You will be interested. And it was so much fun. And I thought it would be really nice to call up Dylan at his Byron Bay Observatory, which must be one of the only observatories in the world that's still open.
Well, there are a lot of observatories. There is an official list if you get a designation with the Minor Planet Centre. And it's a really interesting list because everyone has all of these nerdy kind of names that they put on, like the Star Trek Observatory. And but they get that designation if they've solved for asteroids. So if they've tracked asteroids and done it over a few nights to confirm near-Earth asteroids, and you get a little designation. And that list is publicly available. I don't have a designation yet, but I am working on it. Now, I do want to see that. I want to see if I can actually share my screen with you. So, for a moment, can you see my desktop there?
Sure can, Dylan.
Okay, so first of all, I do have the Byron Bay Observatory website. Please excuse my bird in the background. It's going mental.
I was going to ask, is that a bird?
There is a bird. So this is my video series. If you are interested in learning about taking photos of space and just that astronomy life, which is all just money and women and fast cars, it's pretty ridiculous. It's all in there. All my latest observations and pictures are all in here, and there's some news and some of the asteroid tracking stuff as well. In fact, this is the last exciting comet, which was Africano. So there's an animation of that zipping through space. Right now, the comet on everyone's lips is Comet 2019 Y4 Atlas, which is going to be a naked eye comet and is coming straight towards us, or coming straight towards the sun. But its orbit looks like it's exactly the same as the Great Comet of 1844. Now, if that's the case, if this is the same thing, it's just two parts of the same thing in two different fragments. And one of those fragments went around the sun in 1844, and one of them is coming around now. We think, based on the light curve, that it might be the smaller one coming around now. So it might not be as impressive as the Great Comet of 1844, but it is something to keep your eye on. Now, while I'm here on my desktop, I'm just going to flick over to the Windows side of this screen, which is the worst side. I am a Mac man, and I do most of my stuff on a Mac. Now, can you see this screen,
Yes.
Annie? Okay,
Yes.
This is what we use to take photos and plan our targets. So the last target I was testing out here in the observatory was the Large Magellanic Cloud, which is the big galaxy. Big, really kind of messed up looking galaxy. It's not that classic spiral that we're all used to. It's a real ugly duckling. Let's face it, here in the southern hemisphere, we have some big stuff, but in terms of galaxies, we don't have the big, beautiful Andromeda that they have in the northern hemisphere. We've got this screwed up looking weirdo, the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds. And in here is the Tarantula Nebula. So that's how I plan my shots, and this image is downloaded from a catalogue so that you can then frame up the image the way you want. Now I have all my cameras and telescope and all this connected here, and the new part for this, for me, is this observatory section. I've never had this before, and this should allow me to open and close the observatory. However, this is brand new. I've had this for a week now. Now you can see me again, I think. So what I'm going to try and do is hit the open button and actually see if anything opens.
It sounds like something's happening.
Here we go. I'm trying not to break anything here, but you should see.
Oh, wow.
So this is all robotic now. It's doing this all by itself, which is great. There's a little homing sensor at the top of the dome, and it should know where to go and where to stop. But here's the, here's the first bug. It shouldn't have stopped there. It should have kept going. So these are all little driver issues and things that I have to work out. But the aim of all of this is to automate. I want to basically not be in here. I want to be inside drinking a fine wine while I tell my robotic computer observatory just go and take pretty pictures, come back in the morning and process all that data. That's the dream.
That sounds ideal. And I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could also hook it up to your system so that if you were traveling, you could do it from overseas as well?
Exactly, exactly. In fact, all of that is possible. Let me see if I can show you something else the observatory does. So let me just share my screen one more time. I'll go back in here. Oops. Okay, now you should see a screen loading up with temperature.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the sky temperature, not the actual temperature. The actual temperature is 30 degrees according to the sense here, which makes my visual gag of wearing a tuxedo rather awkward right now. And I may be ripping off this tuxedo in a second. I can see there's clouds. I can see the wind speed is bursting up to 3 kilometers an hour. I can see the rain sensor is dry and the light sensor says it's very light. And clearly it's daytime right now. So all of this is unsafe, which is why it says status unsafe. So essentially the observatory has all of these sensors, so it knows when there's a cloud overhead, when it's too windy, if it's too hot or cold, if it's raining, and if it's too bright. You can see how this graph just drops off here. So that was the night time where the light just disappeared and it was dark enough to image. So when all of these things are aligned, when all of these things goes green, we get a nice little switch closed here and the relay sort of says, yep, you're all good to go. So the observatory knows when it's safe. So yes, I could be traveling. I could even just schedule up stuff so that I have a list of things and I just feed it the list of things and it just goes through that list until it's got all the data I need. And it just does all that by itself, schedules it all by itself. That's the dream, and that's what I'm working on. And I feel like I've got a lot of time to work and fiddle with this stuff now during cosmic isolation.
That is true. Although, do you feel that potentially the automation side of it might take some of the sport out of the experience?
Yes. This is the old question. Is it like fishing? Is it more about the journey? Should we be enjoying the journey along the way? And you know what? I say no. It's about the fish. I like fish. I like to eat fish. Fish are wonderful. And for me, it's about the end goal. I'm not one of these dudes that likes to fiddle in the garage. I don't have a Harley in pieces that I'm putting together. I actually like the end result. And so, yes, I am working towards the fish here. But that's not to say I'm not going to get a little bit of joy out of fiddling and spraying WD-40 in the joints and all that.
Well, I've got to say, I have seen this observatory in person, but it is so nice seeing it on video because from the inside like this, it looks amazing. Can you talk us through how you built this?
So there's a really great video that I put together with a guy called Diego Colonello. He's from Sidereal Trading in Melbourne. Like all retailers, we're all struggling right now. So if you are interested in your own astronomical outpost, you definitely give Sidereal Trading a call because Diego flew up. I paid for him to fly up and help me. And so we just drank beers all weekend and put all of this together, which was fantastic. You can see over here there is a data cabinet. And, oh, look, I've revealed the fact that I'm wearing shorts. The illusion has been broken. The fourth wall is down. I'm sorry, the fourth wall is down. Anyway, as I was saying, the data cabinet here has the switch and all the power, and they're all relays, so I can program these. So I can say turn on the camera or turn off this thing, turn off the lights here. Then we have this this little switch here, which is quite special because if I push it, let me just adjust it. Here we go. Hey.
Yes.
And the dome will rotate wherever I need it. And this is how eventually when it's all connected up, right, what happens is that the lighting's better. This angle is much better. The telescope and the dome opening there will follow each other. So wherever the telescope goes, the dome will go as well. But yeah, the construction process, basically concrete pad, the kit walls, all of this comes in a kit in pieces which you can put together yourself if you're a fiddly kind of person. And there's a little bit of problem solving, but it is something that you can do yourself. And I've been doing it with my kids, and they love hanging out here. They come and they push the buttons and they watch it spin around. They think it's amazing.
Yeah, look, if you were going to install your own observatory in your own backyard and be really antisocial about it, now is the time to do so. I'm pretty sure that, like, if you sort of make the right noises at Scott Morrison, he'd even probably pay for it. I don't know. It's very confusing. But maybe if you want one of these observatories, try tweeting at him and see what he says. You never know. I think this just looks fabulous. And can we have a closer look at your telescope?
Sure. So, maybe you can stand up here. All right, this is the Celestron RASA. It's an 11-inch telescope, but it's not about the size, it's about what you do that counts. So even though this looks impressive, it actually has a very small focal length, which is, or I should say wide. That means its magnifying power isn't as big as some smaller, stubbier telescopes. But what's really interesting about this sort of telescope setup is you'll notice that the camera is at the front of the telescope, which is weird, right? You're not used to seeing the camera at the front there. And in fact, if we spin around to the back, you'll notice there's no eyepiece. There's nothing to look through. This is a very expensive telescope for something that you can't even look through, which is kind of confusing and a little bit counterintuitive at first, but I'll explain what's happening here. So RASA stands for Roe Ackerman Schmidt Astrograph, which is what's written on the side here. It's an F2 telescope, which means it's super fast. It collects those photons really quickly. This big light bucket at the front here collects all the light in here, which comes down to a mirror at the back here, like mirror, which then focuses all of that into a narrow beam into the middle of the tube here, which is where the camera is sitting. So that's the focus point of the camera. And there's a little distance, so there's a very particular distance that you have to get for the camera to be in focus, so that all of that light, like a magnifying glass, is sort of focused at a very narrow point in space, which is where the camera sensor is and where you collect all the data. But this particular setup, this particular configuration of telescope, it's just very fast. It means what used to take an hour, so taking a photo that really was an hour-long exposure, like leaving the camera open for an hour to collect that light, now takes about 1 minute. So you end up with these exposures of space, which are very, very deep exposures. Let me see if I can find an example of a deep exposure that I've done with this telescope for you.
That would be awesome.
So I shall share my screen one more time. Okay, so this is a false color image. Do you see that one? Yes. This is the Rosette Nebula, which is still overhead at night time right now. I'll see if I can zoom in there so you can see a bit of the detail. But you can see, normally in the old days, when I say the old days, I mean like way back in the old days in the early 2000s, this sort of exposure would have taken half an hour, like 20-minute exposures at a time. Like it takes a long time to get this faint object. And it is faint. If you were looking at this with your eyepiece, I've done it before, you could really only see maybe a little bit of a grey smudge around here, and you can make out these sort of 6 distinct bright stars in the middle here. You don't see any of this. This deep exposure comes because of the digital cameras we use, because digital cameras are just way, way, way more sensitive than our puny human eyeballs. So that's an example of, I'll show you one more just because it's nice. We're doing this video casting stuff and it's nice to be visual for a change. All the people on the audio podcast right now are going, what the hell are you guys talking about?
Yeah, I know. Well, they've got to move with the times. I mean, the minute that this sort of stuff happened, I was like, well, there's no way we can keep doing the audio podcast. We've got to go video.
Okay, so you can describe this one, Annie. You tell the viewers and the confused podcast audience what we're looking at.
Okay, so imagine that you've got a sort of a photo, but imagine it's a photograph of some stars, and then you've got a thumb and you've dipped it in some butter and you've smudged it a bunch. That's kind of what it looks like. And then in the middle, there's this thing that looks a bit like a portal to another world, and it's all pink. So kind of like a smudgy photograph of stars with a portal in the middle is exactly what it looks like.
That's a great description, a portal. I love that.
What's your more technical description of what we're viewing?
Now, can you see my mouse? Can you see where I'm? Oh, good, excellent. So this section here is the Orion Nebula. This is part of Orion. This is in the nearby the 3 stars you can see in the sky of the classic constellation Orion, which honestly is one of the only ones I can recognise. Even though I'm a professional astronomer now, I don't really look at orderisms like that. I just use the computer to do all the work for me. So this here is M42, Messier 42, which is the classic big bright target. Beginners love it because it's so bright. You can basically put your smartphone up to the window of the telescope and take out an image and see these clouds. They're really quite remarkable. Of course, I'm using the RASA F2 here, so I get this deep exposure. So even though, I think these were only 90 seconds, maybe 90 seconds, I'm not sure, I'll have to check. I was able to pull out a lot of depth. So this wispy brown dust and gas that you see around the place, most of it is ionized hydrogen. So it kind of glows and it emits this energized light that makes it all the way back to Earth so that we can sense it. So a lot of that dust is illuminated. There is more dust out here that we can't see because it's not being excited as much. And an example of that is these 2 colors in here. The colors, when we're looking at a nebula photo, especially if it's a true color photo like this one, when we're looking at the pink, this is the classic hydrogen signature. Hydrogen is the reds. If it hit our eyeballs, it would be on the red side of the spectrum. And then we've got these blues. So some of these clouds over here are distinctly blue. Now that's where you have dust and gas that isn't being ionized. So it's not being energized. There's no solar wind whipping through here. It's just the light of these baby blue stars, these big, energetic, young stars, which is just shining and reflecting. So it's just reflecting light. It's like just having a torch in a smoky room. Whereas the pink stuff is like the aurora. So think of it like how the solar wind hits our atmosphere and we get the northern lights. That's what's happening here in the pink stuff. And of course, all through the image, you see these small orange stars. Now these are the old fellas. These are the old guys, the old ladies of space who are on their way to death, just like the rest of us. Superseded momentarily by the big, fancy blue babies here. So that's what we're seeing.
That's absolutely beautiful. Forgive the uneducated question, but when you say that it's true color versus false color, what I imagine that means is true color is where it's the wavelengths hitting your telescope are within a visible light spectrum, or you can assign it as such. And so it's kind of like how it does look if you look through a telescope. Yep. Whereas when it's false color, you're splitting up the light that you're getting in your exposure and then assigning colors. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, we've got a spectrum of energy where we have, I'm just going to get this right, the video camera. Let's say slow stuff over here for the reds and the fast stuff over here for the purples. And we've got the whole rainbow in between. And then there's all the stuff out of the spectrum we can't see, the infrared and the ultraviolet. But in this bulk here in the middle where we have the rainbow, we can see that color with our eyes. There's some of it off the edge, the infrared, and the ultraviolet we can't see, and then everything else is invisible to us, like microwaves and radio waves and stuff like that. But all of this stuff in the visual spectrum, we have mapped to colors of the rainbow. We can see all of that spectrum of rainbow from red to purple. And when we take a true color image, we're just taking a camera that's very much like our eyeballs and just taking the red, green, and blue and putting them all into a picture that we can easily interpret in our human eye perception way as an RGB normal spectrum image. Now, when we're taking narrowband images, which are considered false color, they still lie in the visual spectrum. They still are picking out bits from within the red and within the green, blue. Primarily, the most common ones are the hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur or sodium. Either one gets you. And in fact, Hubble has a whole rainbow palette of different filters you can use. But I think sulfur is the one that backyard astronomers tend to use. And we combine these images to get, like I showed you with the Rosette Nebula before, a really kind of rainbowy effect. And to illustrate this point, let me show you the difference, because I've showed you the Rosette in false color. I'll just remind you what that looks like. This is my website, by the way, geography.com. So feel free to go and have a squiz at all these. So that's our false color image. That's not what it looks like. This is in what's called a Hubble palette with a little bit of extra processing to really draw out the difference. But what we're looking at here is oxygen mapped to the blue and the hydrogen here mapped to a green, but I've adjusted it so it looks a little bit more brown. But these images tend to look very green without a bit of processing. Now I'll try and find an image of that same one in true color. So this is the same thing, but if we saw it without that narrowband differentiation, and you see that the hydrogen just dominates the entire picture. You get that pink all the way through. So what narrowband imaging lets us do is actually differentiate. Like, I can't look at this now and tell you where the oxygen is. It all just appears to be dominated by hydrogen. Whereas if we go back to the one we were looking at before, you can see a very clear differentiation in the chemical structure of this nebula. So that's a really interesting way to look at images, and certain people prefer the narrowband ones and certain people prefer the true color ones. I think they're both pretty cool. So we can appreciate them on different levels.
So by doing the narrowband image with the false color, is that more of an artistic choice, or is that genuinely a scientific choice that, you know, it's sort of legitimate to make? I mean, is there judgment, is what I'm getting at, from the astronomers on the astrophotographers who use narrowband rather than the, I guess, real color? Or
look, there is, and everything is subjective in terms of how we perceive color. You know, what is truth is a very philosophical question when we're talking about all of this. This is a tool I've developed which is a little bit more objective in the sense that you just feed it your hydrogen, your sulfur, and your oxygen, which is these three black and white ones at the top here, and it will show you every possible combination. So it says, well, what happens if we map the hydrogen to blue or map it to green? And this shows you every combination that happens. So essentially what makes any one of these better, that's up to the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does it have scientific value? Well, yeah, maybe if we're trying to look for the differentiation between hydrogen and sulfur, then maybe this one will work better. But at the end of the day, that's a subjective question. And there's that philosophical argument, is the red that I'm looking at the same red that you're looking at? Are we perceiving these differently? Are we arguing over something that you can't hold on to in the first place? So yeah, there is something called like a processing integrity, when you process your images to make them as scientifically perfect as possible. And that means not using the clone tool in Photoshop to cheat and get rid of any imperfections, keeping the color unclipped so everything is perfect. But to be honest, in science, they don't really use color. You'll notice all the images that come from Hubble, they're processed by a team of people who include artists who present those images to the public. The scientists writing paper on Hubble data, you're not going to see many colour photos in there.
Yeah, for sure. And so then it becomes a question of, as you say, the difference in perception. And one of the things that we talk about in history and philosophy of science is that very question of what role does the technology play in perception and then in influencing the end result. And the classic one that we tend to use is the microscope. So when you look through a microscope, it's tempting to kind of say, well, what it is the image I see through my microscope. But the philosophical angle in that is to say, well, hang on a second, you've put this intermediary translation there so that you can see that. And the intermediary translation itself is built along certain rules that will privilege some image over other images. And if you had built it in a different way, it might show you a very different result. And so your image of like what a virus looks like, for example, to be topical, might be something quite different. And it's very parallels from that to other issues of perception that we might have in our general existence, whether it's looking at galaxies and nebulas and so on and deciding what color they are, or whether it's viewing the behavior of others through a certain cultural lens or something like that. So subjectivity is something that's kind of key. But what I really like is that, as you say, there's this overlap of the artistic and the scientific, even in the images that we see of the Hubble telescope, and that you've got these ideas working together. And in some ways, by, as you say, mapping things to different colors, you can get a better sense of what's actually there than you can from what your natural vision might tell you.
Yeah, and it's natural to want to know how things look with our own eyeballs. Like when I see images coming back from Mars, the Mars rover, it was very confusing at first when the images were coming because I had no calibration. I had no way to know, is all of this red landscape exactly how it looks? Is that how it looks to my eyes, or is this what's coming back from the camera? How has that been processed? And what I found really useful was if you can find the images that include, like if it has an arm of the rover or a wheel or something, and you can see when the processing, it looks like natural metal, the same way you would view it here back on Earth. That's a really good way to calibrate your brain. Go, now I can sort of see how Mars actually looks. It's a bit like that viral image of the dress. No one knew what color it was, and it's the same with Mars. We don't really have anything to hang on to with those images unless we see something familiar that we can calibrate with our eyes that's down on Earth as well. They do have small plates, color calibration plates on the rovers and many missions out there where the camera can look and see a rainbow or some color tabs so that they can calibrate the cameras as well. But yeah, perception and the way our perception is altered with cameras is a important question. As I said, there are parts of the spectrum that are just outside of our field of vision, particularly the infrared and the ultraviolet. If we could see ultraviolet, the world would look very, very different. And surely there are animals who can see a little further into that spectrum than we can, and the world would look like a very different place. There are some revealing videos on YouTube. I think Derek from Veritasium did one where he played with filters where you could see the world, how it looked. And all of our cameras, all of our smartphones have these cameras, and all of those sensors in there have an infrared filter because cameras pick up infrared. And if we saw our photos coming with the infrared layer, they would look hugely different. Now that's very different with the cameras on the telescope. That is what we want. We don't want that infrared filter there because there's a lot of infrared in space that we're trying to capture. So yeah, the camera and the very act of capturing things definitely makes a difference to how we perceive and what the objective truth is.
Yes. So if you gave the nebula an image that you'd taken of it, it may not recognize itself in that image.
Almost certainly not. In fact, it's tempting to look at those images, those beautiful cloudy images, and go, wow, what would it look like if I was inside that nebula? Would I be looking at like this beautiful sunset style sky 24/7? And the answer is we are already in one of those. We are in a solar nebula. We can perceive the zodiacal light over the horizon at some times of the year. But the nebula around us, the nebula from which our star is born, is so diffuse when we're up close, we can't really see it. And that's the same for someone who would be sitting inside of M42 right now. They wouldn't see this big, beautiful, dusty pink object. That is an aggregate of light years of data. Someone sitting in the middle of it would not perceive any of that at all.
Dylan, this is fantastic. If I'm a person sitting at home, now this is not me because I live in an apartment, but if I'm a person sitting at home with a backyard who's thinking, maybe I'll get into this astrophotography thing. So you've already said, you've mentioned there was that company that has the...
Yeah, if you want to spend a lot of money and go really down the rabbit hole and build an astronomical outpost that controls itself and be the weird guy on the street with an observatory, definitely call sidereal trading. But if you want to just dip your toe in the water, you don't want to bankrupt your family just yet, then I would suggest going out and buying a small telescope. Now, the telescopes that I recommend have changed recently. I always recommend starting with a DSLR camera first, or even a smartphone. They're getting better at taking images of the Milky Way. But start with a DSLR camera and just go to a dark sky location, open up that shutter for 30 seconds on a high ISO, and you will get a beautiful image of the Milky Way. You will see small pockets of nebula, you can see distant galaxies. It's quite amazing, and that's with no telescope whatsoever. If you do have a little bit of money burning a hole in your pocket, I do recommend either binoculars, which is a great way to start, because you can just start pointing out stuff in the sky, and you will, again, get nebulas, galaxies, globular clusters, comets even. But it gets annoying with the binoculars because they shake, and that's why I like telescopes. Telescopes, you can then hook up to cameras, and that's where things get really fun. Now, the beginner telescopes that I recommend now have changed. I have always loved telescopes that are computerized because it takes some of the work out of it, and it means, especially as a beginner, you can just say, show me stuff. What's over here? What is that? Now, a telescope that has become really good at that and was released just this year earlier at the CES Vegas Tech Show was the Celestron Star Explorer. Okay? StarSense Explorer, Celestron StarSense Explorer. It's a really great little telescope because what they've done is, instead of selling you all of this electronic stuff in the guts of it, you can just stick your phone on it. You stick your phone on it, point your telescope anywhere. It uses your phone's camera to take images of what the sky looks like and tells you what you're looking at. So it's a really great way of interfacing the phone's electronics with the telescope. And I've been using them for a little while now with the kids, and they're really portable and really fun. So that's a nice way to get into it. But if you're asking me about astrophotography, it starts to get a little bit expensive, and it starts to get a little bit hairy, and I'm still going down that rabbit hole today. But if you are interested in that, I do recommend following my videos on YouTube and giving me some of that sweet, sweet YouTube revenue.
Absolutely. So if you are interested, I will put a link in the description of this video to Dylan's YouTube and to that very fun sort of stick your phone in it and point it at things equipment that he mentioned, and also a link to Dylan's website so you can see all the amazing photographs. And I've actually used them because Dylan very kindly allows people to use his astrophotography images for various purposes. So I've used them before for making logos for this podcast, and not the main one, but the one with the tardigrades. So I really recommend that, and you can find some excellent options there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Annie. It's been really lovely to be on the video podcast experiment with you, and I hope your cosmic isolation goes well.
Well, thank you. I'd like to congratulate you on, really showing me up, both in terms of your outfit choice and your location. I thought this was pretty good, but this sheet from Kmart doesn't look nearly as cool. See, this is the world we now live in. I think it's very strange, this whole, yes, as you say, cosmic isolation. It's a strange place to be. Thank you so much, and feel free to get in contact with me, or I guess if you can get in contact with Dylan, I'm sure you should do that. And you can find him on Twitter, Instagram, all over the internet. Highly recommend it.
Thank you very much, Annie, and keep up the good work.
Will do.